Hey, shalom, guys. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the concept known as the Messiah's donkey. Now, with if you are a Christian, you are very familiar with the accounts of Jesus seeing a donkey, riding upon it into Jerusalem, and then obviously a week later, he was executed. But there is so many messianic prophecies regarding this, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about and go more in detail today. So, the concept of Messiah's donkey can be found in Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 to 7, Mark 11, 1 to 7, Luke 19, 20 to 35, and John 12, 14 to 16. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, the next day, Yeshua and his followers set off from Bethany. They had only a short 2-mile trek over the top of the Mountain of Olives. Today, a stiff uphill 20-minute walk from the Al Azariah brings one to the location of Bethphage, a sister village to Bethany that sat near the top of the Mountain of Olives. Now, Bethphage, or Beit Pagi, means house of unripe figs. Now, apparently, an Aramaic name for a certain type of fig that grew there. Now, from the Talmud right here, from B. Pesakim 53a, which speaks of the Pegi Bet Hani, i.e., the unripe figs of Bet Hani, in the Talmud B. Mila 7a, Bethphage also appears as Kafar Fagi, or village of unripe figs. A second location with a name almost identical to Bethphage or Bet Pegi, which caused several interpreters confusion about the location of the village. Now, in several places, the Talmud refers to the walls of Bethphagi or Bethpagi as it locates Bethphage within the outermost walls of Jerusalem. For more on this, look at B. Peskim 53b, 91a, and B. Soda 45a, and B. Bava Metzia 90a, or adjoining to those walls. Now, Rashi here explains that these instances of the term Beit Pagi are referring to an area outside of the original wall surrounding Jerusalem that was later annexed to the city and surrounded by another wall. Jerusalem underwent two such northern expansions. Now, in the time of Herod the Great and another time in Herod Agrippa I, Bethphage in the Talmud then should probably be understood as a village just outside of Jerusalem walls that later became enclosed within the walls. Now, perhaps when Herod Agrippa expanded the northern wall into the city. Now, the particular use of Bethphage in the Gospels may distinguish between two different sites named Bethphage. Now, when the Gospels mention Bethphage, they do so in connection with Bethany or the Mountain of Olives, or both, as it is distinguished Bethphage of Bethany on the Mountain of Olives from another Bethphage. Matthew 21:1 has Bethphage at the Mountain of Olives. Mark 11:1 has Bethphage and Bethany at the Mountain of Olives. Luke 19:29 has Bethphage and Bethany at the mountain called the Mountain of Olives. Now, the Franciscan Church of Bethphage, located on the Mountain of Olives, may reserve the location of the village. On Palm Sunday, Christian follows the path of the Master's triumph entry with the possession from the Bethphage Church to Jerusalem. The Master sent 2 disciples into the village with instructions to unite and bring him the first donkey they found. If anyone objected, they were to explain, quote, "The Master has need of it." Now, the 2 disciples did as Yeshua told them, quote, "Those who were sent away and found it just as he had told them." Luke 19:32. Now, they went to the village of Bethphage, and just as Yeshua had said, they found a young donkey tied at the entrance outside in the street, tied up next to its mother. They began to untie the donkey, but some of the owners and some of the bystanders objected, saying, "What are you doing untying the colt?" Mark 11:5. The disciples replied, "The Master has need for it." The men immediately consented. Now, had Yeshua made arrangements with the colt's owner in advance, or was this a demonstration of miraculous foresight? Now, if the entire matter had been arranged ahead of time, the Gospels would not relate the story as anything exceptional. It would have been sufficient for the Gospels to say, "Brought him a young donkey." The Gospel writers understood the event as remarkable and miraculous. Somehow Yeshua had known that the disciples would find a donkey colt tied just inside the village, and somehow he knew that the owner would consent to lending the animal to him. Now, up until that point in his life and work, Yeshua had tried to keep his messianic identity quiet. He warned his followers and his disciples not to tell anyone who he was. He hushed up the eerie voices of the possessed when he tried to declare his identity. When Simon Peter confessed, "You are the Messiah," he told him not to reveal it to anyone. By setting for a donkey, however, he indicated a shift in public policy. He was ready to declare to Israel that he was her long awaited Messiah king. He prepared to enter Jerusalem as predicted by the prophet Zechariah. Quote, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout and trumpet, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey." That comes from Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, the main study of this video. Now, if not for the messianic enthusiasm fronting around him, his ride on a donkey would not have attracted any attention. Donkeys provided a common mode of travel in the land. The disciples themselves missed the allusion to Zechariah 9:9. Not until Yeshua had risen did they that he intended the donkey ride as a messianic claim. Quote, "Then they remembered that these things were written of him." John 12:16. Now, rabbinic literature unanimously interprets Zechariah 9:9 as a messianic prophecy. Another prophecy about the Messiah's donkey appears in the Torah, where the patriarch Jacob predicted, quote, "He ties his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine." Genesis 49:1. Together, the two prophecies forged a link between Messiah and his donkey. The rabbis interpreted almost every donkey reference in the Bible as a subtle allusion to the coming of the Messiah. This reading comes from Midrash Rabbah in Genesis 98:9, which says, quote, "His foal and his donkey's colt," in Genesis 49:11, "refer to the time when he will come, to whom it is written in Zechariah 9:9, quote, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Abraham's donkey in the story of the binding of Isaac alludes to the time, quote, "when he comes, of whom it is written, humble and mounted on a donkey." Genesis Rabbah 56:2. Now, likewise, Jacob's donkey in Genesis 32:5 refers to the king Messiah, Genesis Rabbah 75:6. So too the donkey that belongs to Moses. Now, here, check this out. This comes from Midrash Rabbah Ecclesiastes 128, which says, "Rabbi Berika said in the name of Rabbi Yitzhak, the later Redeemer will be like the first Redeemer." What does Exodus 4:20 say about the first Redeemer? "So Moses took his wife and his sons and mounted them on the donkey. In the same way, the later Redeemer will come, as it is stated, quote, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, in one midrash, the donkey of Messiah is related to Balaam's donkey, and it is the same donkey upon which both Abraham and Moses rode. Rashi on Exodus 4:12. Now, contrary to that midrash, the donkey upon which the master rode was one upon which no one had ever sat. Mark 11:2. For a polemic anti-Yeshua midrash about Yeshua's donkey, check out Ecclesiastes Rabbah 1:5. Now, this reading here comes from Periki de Rabbi Eliezer 31, and this is what it says. "Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey." Genesis 22:3. "Upon this donkey Abraham rode. This donkey was the offspring of the donkey which was created during the twilight of the sixth day of creation. The same donkey was also ridden by Moses, which he came to Egypt, as it says in Exodus 4:20. So Moses took his wife and his sons and mounted them on the donkey. The same donkey will be ridden upon in the future by the son of David." Obviously, that here is referring to the Messiah. Now, Jewish thought so firmly connected the image of a donkey with the coming of the Messiah that the Talmud says, quote, "If a person dreams about a donkey, he may hope for salvation, as it is written, behold, your king is coming to you, endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey." Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud Baruch 56b. Now, the concept of Messiah's donkey plays an important role in Jewish mysticism, and modern Hebrew uses the phrase Messiah's donkey or Kamoro Shel Mashiach to refer to someone who does the dirty work on behalf of someone else. Even Jewish mysticism makes a connection to the donkey's redemption in Exodus 34:20. The imagery, the messianic donkey, persisted into Hasidic mysticism, where it received Talmudic interpretations based upon the similarity between the Hebrew word for donkey, chamor, and the Hebrew word for material and physical labor, chomer. The Messiah brings about the redemption, but the redemption must be ushered in through the physical and in the material world. A tied donkey colt that no person has ever sat upon, Mark 11:2. Now, the master's donkey colt was unbroken. No one had ever ridden on it or sat upon it. Animals used for certain ritual purposes needed to be in a similar virgin state. Now, for example, an animal designated for sacrifice could not subsequently be used for some other purpose. Now, a suitable red heifer could not have even worn a yoke, Numbers 19:2. And if you also look at Deuteronomy 21:3, 1 Samuel 6:7, and look at Targum Pseudo Jonathan on Numbers 19:2, which says, "Nor the burden of any work been imposed, neither hurt by the thing, nor grieved by the ground, or prick, nor collar or brand, or like any yoke." The colt on which no one has yet ever sat signifies that no one before our master nor since our master could fulfill the messianic prophecies such as Zechariah 9:9. Only Yeshua could fill those shoes. The words on which no one yet has ever sat also reminds us of the tomb where no one had ever lain, Luke 23:53. Now, those who have experienced the fowls and unbroken steed animals realize that one does not simply climb up on a colt on which no one has ever sat. As with horses, a donkey has to become slowly and carefully accustomed to the idea of carrying a rider. By most accounts, donkeys are even more difficult to train than horses. Now, under ordinary circumstances, any unbroken donkey could have quickly buckled his rider from his back, regardless of the messianic implications of the occasion. Now, Yeshua's ride into Jerusalem on an unbroken donkey therefore represents another miracle of the Master. Now, both Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of John directly quote the messianic donkey prophecy of Zechariah 9:9 as they tell the story of the Master's entrance into Jerusalem. This is the ninth of Matthew's 10 formalic quotations in which the Gospel writers say this was to fulfill what was spoken. We see this in Matthew 1:22-23, 2:15, 17-18, 23, chapter 4, verse 14-16, chapter 8, verse 17, chapter 12, verse 17-21, chapter 13, verse 35, chapter 21, verses 4-5, chapter 27, verses 9-10. And also look at Matthew chapter 2, verse 5-6, and 26:31. Now, the prophecy as it appears in Zechariah with the quotations in Matthew and in John. Now, here is Zechariah 9:9. It specifically says this. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, Matthew 21:5 says this. "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." John 12:15, "Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." Now, both Matthew and John truncate the passage. Neither Matthew nor John convey Zechariah's address here. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem." Now, Matthew here reduces it to say, "daughter of Zion," while John reduces it to say, "Fear not, daughter of Zion." Matthew may have combined two different prophecies on the basis of Gereza Shava, or the verbal analogy, to create a midrashic reading of the prophecy. Now, like Zechariah 9:9, a prophecy in Isaiah 60-11 addresses the daughter of Zion with a promise of the coming Messiah. So, Isaiah chapter 62, verse 11 says, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your salvation comes. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him." Zechariah 9:9 brings up, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming to you, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, the original version of Matthew, or the source document from which Matthew drew from, may have contained a fuller version of both of these prophecies. Now, Rabbi Lichtenstein has a commentary on Matthew 21:5, and this is what it says. The part through the years, the words from "to the daughter of Zion" up to "the daughter of Zion" were lost due to this similarity of the expressions, and thus created our version now before us. Now, in other words, Lichtenstein suspects that a scribal error accounts for the two prophecies, collapsing them into one. Scribes routinely introduced omissions like this into manuscripts while copying. The scribe's eye sometimes skipped to an identical word or phrase or similar cluster of letters further on in the manuscript when he was copying, causing him to inadvertently omit a line. Whether or not this accounts for Matthew 21:5 can only be a matter of conjecture, but in any case, Matthew intended some combination of Isaiah 62:11 with Zechariah 9:9. Now, for more on the scribal errors introduced into the New Testament manuscripts, see Bart Ehrman's book, Misquoting Jesus, the story behind who changed the Bible and why. Now, in any case, Matthew certainly intended to import Isaiah 62:11 and combine it with Zechariah 9:9 in a good rabbinic fashion, using both texts to elucidate each other. Now, John addresses, quote, "Fear not, daughter of Zion," has no exact equivocation in the prophets, but Lichtenstein here explains it as a paraphrase that conveys the sense of prophecy, quote, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion." Now, the prophet tells the daughter of Zion to rejoice because she need no longer fear her enemies. As the previous verse said, "I will encamp around my house because of an army. No oppressor will pass over them." Zechariah 9:8. Now, Lichtenstein also says on his commentary of John 12:15, "In my view, John did not quote this verse word for word, but rather paraphrased it while conveying its meaning, like other gospel writers and especially Paul in his epistles. When we notice that this verse is a continuation of the previous verse, Zechariah 9:8, then I will encamp at my house as a guard, so that one shall march for, and no oppressor shall march again over them. For now I see with my own eyes, the meaning becomes clear. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, and I no longer fear anything." Therefore, John adds, according to the intended meaning of the passage, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion." Now, unlike John, Matthew preserved the original parallel repetition of the biblical Hebrew. The Zechariah prophecy refers to the Messiah's steed as, 1, a donkey, and 2, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now, such repetitions, now a synonymous parallelism, occur regularly in biblical poetry, and they rarely imply a literal doubling. Zechariah called the steed both a donkey and a colt, the foal of a donkey, but the prophet had only one donkey in mind. The rabbis, however, often capitalize on repetitions in Hebrew parallelism for exegetical purposes. They enjoyed the interpretation, the repeated elements, as if they literally conveyed a subject of change. Now, Matthew employs the same rabbinic methodology as he tells the story of the Messiah's donkey. Instead of finding one donkey, Matthew has the disciples finding a donkey tied with a colt on her, Matthew 21:2. They brought both the donkey and its colt to the master. They laid their coats over the both animals as makeshift saddles and, quote, "and he sat on them," which might simply imply that somehow the master straddled both animals, or that he rode one from the some distance and then switched to the other, Matthew 21:7. Now, Matthew 21:7 has an unclear antecedent. He sat on them. Did he sit on the donkeys or on the colts laid over the donkeys? Lichtenstein's commentary on Matthew 21:7 explains, on the cloaks, for it appears that the disciples wanted was to have him sit on their coats between the two animals, but he was unable to sit that way. So he sat and rode upon the colt alone, as Mark, Luke, and John tell us, and there was no longer any conflict between them. Rabbi Lichtenstein absurdly imagines the disciples attempting deliberately to fulfill a hyperliteral reading of Zechariah 9:9 by seating the Messiah's two donkeys simultaneously. But in truth, the disciples were not thinking of the prophecy at all. John 12:16 explains that the disciples did not realize the prophetic significance of the master's donkey ride until later. Matthew's two donkeys are consistent with several other curious doublings in the Gospel of Matthew. Examples: Matthew 8:28, 9:27, 20:30, 26:60, and only Matthew has the double donkey interpretation. And there you guys have it. That is the Jewish significance of Zechariah 9:9, applying it to the Gospels of another messianic prophecy that the Jews even today realize points directly to Messiah Yeshua. I hope this video was a blessing to you. Please like, share, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Shalom.